Welcome to episode number 270 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Eilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Our second book is called From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing. So go and pick up that book on Amazon today. We call these interviews the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, my next guest and I, we met as speakers on a panel talking about getting volunteers for nonprofits during the pandemic. So you never really know when you're going to meet somebody that can help you, but make sure that you focus on how you can help other people. It needs to be a win-win scenario. And we're going to be talking about that during this interview. If you focus on that win-win scenario, all kinds of new opportunities are going to come your way in life. Our next guest is Brian Bates. Brian was the owner of the Laurus Group, founded in May 2005, which got its start primarily as a fraternal fundraising and a communications firm specializing in major capital campaigns. With over 50 years of fraternity experience, the Laurus Group has conducted numerous feasibility studies and successfully executed capital campaigns and alumni communications programs. It has helped clients raise in excess of $30 million just as the Laurus Group. But then in March of 2015, the Laurus Group and Stewart Howe Alumni Service merged to create what's called Elevate. And now they elevate your communications, your fundraising, and your members' experience. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Michael, thank you very much. It's such an honor to be here with you today.
It's great having you here on the show. When we first met, it was just so obvious to me that you are a wealth of knowledge. And I needed to get you on the show as quickly as I possibly could to make sure that you share that information with our listeners, because boy, oh boy, I mean, we need mentors. We need guys like you all day long. So I am just very, very happy that you're on the show.
Thank you. Humbled to appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit. Let's go all the way back to Drake University, because that is the university you chose in Des Moines, Iowa, of all places, for your undergraduate experience. And I'm sure you had plenty of choices. So what made you choose Drake of all places?
Sure. Great question. Born and raised in Denver, and had as you can imagine, a number of amazing schools there, but I wanted to get away from home. 18 years old, and you want to spread your wings a little bit. My dad is from Iowa, from northwest corner of Sioux City. And so Drake was a great opportunity for me to be far enough away from home, but still have that safety net of family in the area. So packed up my bags and headed across I-80 to Des Moines, and it was a great experience. Go Bulldogs.
I totally get it. I went to school at the University of Buffalo, which was about 8 hours away from the New York City area where I grew up and where I was born. So I definitely needed a little bit of space from my parents at that particular stage of my life. Because you know what, they had to actually call me and contact me if they wanted to come visit. It wasn't like they can just like stop on over because they were in the neighborhood. And I think that enabled me to kind of build my own little life in Buffalo, separate from what was going on back home and all of the high school students that I went to school with. But I think that space just really kind of enabled me to stand up on my own, as opposed to maybe relying on the safety net of being back home with my parents and everybody who I was raised with since I was a kid.
Yeah, for sure. Love my parents, but it was good for me to have some space.
Yeah, I totally get that. And then you chose to join TKE Fraternity at Drake. So our audience is wondering, what was so special about these particular guys at TKE that made you want to join them as opposed to maybe some other fraternity on campus?
Sure. So as with most people, I went through fall recruitment, and a very rapid process, in and out, and didn't get invites from the groups that I had wanted to, and dropped out of rush. And in hindsight, that was probably one of the best things that I could have done, as I had a chance to get to meet people. And by happenstance, a number of the guys in my dorm floor, joined TKE and got to know them, and invited back over to the house for special events and regular events and parties and things like that, and really got to know them on a personal level and understand the values of the organization and what they believed in. And got invited to an event in spring of 1990, and by happenstance, one of there's going to be lots of coincidences in my life, and I don't necessarily believe that in coincidence that things happen for a reason. And one of the guys and I were dressed almost identical, black and white checkered long sleeve shirt, jeans, and Samba soccer shoes. And his name's Nick, and I signed that night, and I just felt that connection, camaraderie with the guys, and have developed lifelong friendships. And we don't communicate on a regular basis, but as of this morning, I chatted with one of my fraternity brothers whose son has done something amazing. So I took time to get to know them, and that was probably the best decision, one of the best decisions of my life.
See, there's a great lesson in there. It was that relationship with Nick and the other brothers that were in that particular chapter that made you want to join. It wasn't any particular event. It was just the relationship that you had established. And I think that's important for our listeners to remember as they start to approach the fall. Don't focus so much. I see all of these fraternity men talking about, hey, I need this big event. Can you give me an idea for the best event in order to recruit the best people? And I'm like, forget about all of that. Nobody joined because of the event. People joined because of the relationship. If you focus in on that, you're going to get exactly what you want.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to take time to get to know the men and women, on the sorority side, about their values and their beliefs. That we have this superficial time period where we go through and we look at the fancy houses and the pools and the basketball courts and the kitchens and whatnot, but that's not going to be what you remember in 30 years. It's going to be those relationships, those personal experiences that you go through with the people in your chapter. So take time. It's a really important decision, and don't rush through it. Take time to get to know people, and that works for the fraternity men. Interviewing prospective new members as well. Take time to get to know them. Ask them those open-ended questions, not the yeses and the no answers, but the value-based questions of what do you believe in? What gets you excited?
I love that. I wish that there was more time, or we made more time within fraternity and sorority to have those values-based conversations to really figure out, is this person a good fit for our organization or not? So I love where you're going there. I think that's great. And you served as regional director for TKE's headquarters for 3 years after graduation. Tell our audience, what was that experience like? What did you learn from that position?
It was the most exciting and the most terrifying experience, one of the most terrifying and exciting experiences of my life. So I started off as a chapter management consultant. I had the Northeast region, New York, New Jersey, New England, and Canada was my territory. I'm from Denver, college in Iowa, had never been east of the Mississippi River, and my very first chapter visit to get me up to New York was in Elkins, West Virginia, Davis and Elkins College. And what a fascinating experience that was, driving through the mountains of West Virginia. Lots of stories. It was scary. And then my very first chapter visit up in New York, climb up the fire escape to the chapter president's apartment above a bar, or restaurant, or store, or something on whatever main street it was. And he's sitting out there smoking a cigarette and looks at me and says, "Who the F are you, and what the F do you want with my chapter?" And that was my welcome into fraternity consulting and working with collegiate men. But it's an experience that I wouldn't trade for anything. I share that as somewhat of a scary story on the front end, but it really taught me very quickly that I had to adapt. I had to listen. I had to learn to react quickly and put people at ease, and that became the foundation of where I am today. In engaging with people and listening and understanding what their concerns are, what their issues are, what their challenges are, what their opportunities are, and working very quickly to develop a program to help them not only address deficiencies that they may have, but to work and strengthen the strengths and tackle the opportunities that they've got as well.
Yeah, that's a great experience for just about anybody. I'd highly encourage that kind of an experience. For me, I did it as a volunteer. I wasn't even getting paid, but I was working with 5 schools in the Northeast. So they gave me Cornell, Hofstra, Penn College of Technology, Kutztown, and East Stroudsburg. And as I'm working with these 5 chapters, I realized that they're all very different and they all have different needs. I think, we just need to meet them where they're at, and they're all at different stages of development. And going back to your funny story, which is a great story. I remember my first experience walking into the Hofstra chapter on Long Island. And it was really funny because I walked into the chapter room and I could see the charter was up on the wall, and they had their 2 biggest guys basically guarding the charter on the wall. And I'm like, and I walk in and I'm like, this is a weird setup. Like, what are these guys doing over here? And they're like, oh, we thought you were coming to take the charter away.
Yep.
I'm like, no. I've never shut down anything in my life. I'm here to build you up. I'm here to give you the resources you need to be successful. And then I'm looking over, the information. I'm like, oh, okay, now I see why this is. I'm like, you owe like $13,000 to the headquarters right now. Okay, yeah, all right. So now everything is piecing together.
Yeah.
But you just don't know what you're going to find there,
Yeah. The challenge, and this is where, if anybody out there is considering working for their fraternity sorority headquarters, absolutely encourage you to do it. It really gives you a unique experience that is relatively unparalleled in the world, but it teaches you very quickly to listen and understand where each of those individual groups and members are. And you have to listen. You have to ask those questions and listen and poke at them to get them to open up. They hide, we all hide things, especially around somebody that we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it really helps you develop a skill to get people to open up, to trust you, because ultimately at the end of the day, we were there to make them better, to take their deficiencies and work on improving those, one step at a time, and take their strengths and make their strengths even more of a strength. And that's really the opportunities that are out there for groups and for staff members to help those men and women that are out there. And it was a great experience. I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. Yeah. You don't make a lot of money, no, but you get some phenomenal, amazing experiences.
Yeah, I didn't make a dime. For me, it was just being a volunteer. But you're right. Listening first is absolutely a critical skill when you're meeting a new group of people for the first time. It's more about, hey, how can I help you? And then just don't say anything. Just let them kind of guide what you can do for them. And what their needs are at that particular time. Now, you might find out more information over time, and you might adjust how you're helping them. But I think listening first is a great first step.
Well, the challenge with that experience, and I think back to where we are in society today and with culture, is we have a lot of preconceived notions about things, and we make snap judgments based upon either a portion of information that we have or even bad information. We don't take time to listen and evaluate and vet and verify information. We just assume, and that's a very dangerous thing to be in any sense of business, society. So my lesson out there is just take time to listen and understand where people are, and don't prejudge or preconceive what people are thinking, because you never know.
Yeah, you make a great point. I mean, we had a ton of people that were working for headquarters, and everybody had their opinions about certain groups. I mean, the Long Island group that I was referring to at Hofstra, everybody thought that they were dead. They owed too much money. The seniors all graduated, left them with a bunch of freshmen and sophomores that really didn't know what they were doing. And, everybody was ready to give up on them. And, I just happened to be like a few blocks away from them where I lived. So I knew that I could get to them really easily and often. And so I said, you know what? I mean, forget about all these preconceived ideas that everybody else has. Let me just go and see for myself and see if I can actually help them or not, instead of just listening to, all the noise that, forget it. These guys are done. We're just going to pull the charter. And so I'm lucky that, I had the opportunity to work with them, because sure enough, after a couple of years, they started recruiting the best guys on campus. They won Greek Week 3 years in a row at Hofstra. And I was able to, 2 years after I first met them, I was able to present them with the award of most improved chapter in the country.
Yeah.
So, you know what? I mean, just don't listen to all the other stuff. Go and see for yourself. Go and listen and have those conversations. You never know.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh man. So, all right. So you built the Laurus Group for 10 years. It was founded back in 2005. You specialized in these major capital campaigns. You helped your clients raise in excess of $30 million. So tell us, what was the secret to your success in communications and raising money from alumni?
Yeah, having a great business partner. Co-founded the company with my business partner, Bill Paris, who's a member of Kappa Delta Rho. Served on their fraternity and foundation staff, and just as a phenomenal fundraiser. He does exactly what we just talked about. Is he when he's meeting with donors, he's listening, he's asking questions, and he's understanding what motivates them, what their fraternal experience was like, what do they want to see the next generation of young men from that organization accomplish, and trying to build those win-win relationships and understand what motivates him or her, and see if there's an opportunity to connect that with the chapter and organizational need. And when you can do those types of things, where you find out what the drive is on the donor side and what the benefit is on the receiving organization side, you create an amazing opportunity to raise substantial money to benefit organizations. And Bill is a phenomenal listener and understands how to build those win-win relationships with donors.
There it is, the win-win scenario. I think that's another great lesson for our listeners to think about when they meet somebody new. Yes, listen first, but then number two, how do I create a win-win scenario? Yes, you have your own objectives going into a meeting, but instead of just focusing on that, at least initially, start thinking about the other person. What is it that they want out of this meeting? And how can I create a scenario where we both win out of this meeting, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yep. We need to be more selfless
Mm-hmm.
in understanding how we can benefit others. And ultimately that will come back and benefit us in the long run. We all have needs and expectations and wants, but if we can give first, we're going to receive.
Yeah, I totally agree with that philosophy. Now, in March of 2015, the Laurus Group and Stewart Howe Alumni Service merged to create this new entity called Elevate. So what was your thinking at the time in merging these two companies together to form Elevate?
Sure. I'll talk about win-win. That was a win-win, a very synergistic merger between the two companies. The Laurus Group was very focused on capital campaigns, with doing alumni communication as somewhat of a secondary piece, and Stewart Howe was very focused on the alumni communication piece, with capital campaigns as a secondary piece. And so it was a very synergistic fit between the two companies, a great team of people. They already had the infrastructure in place on the alumni communication side. We had the infrastructure in place on the campaign side. So it was a really, really good fit between the two.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And I've done that at Greek University as well. I mean, we haven't had any mergers, but as CEO, I certainly know what we do best. And if there's something out there that we don't do really well, then my first instinct is to outsource it to somebody who's an expert. Why in the world am I going to struggle to do something and maybe do it half-ass if I know that there's an expert out there that already has experience, where we can avoid all of those, those errors and all of, the learning, and instead go straight to success, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to steal a little bit of your thunder from a question down the road, but for the house corporations out there, outsource things that you guys either can't don't do well, don't want to do. There is no need to sit around and take your time as volunteers in worrying about, broken windows and plugged up toilets, when the mission of all of our volunteers should be helping to advise and guide those young men and women to develop into successful young men and women who are going to lead our country, our businesses, and our organizations down the road. So for all those house corporation volunteers, outsource stuff. There are plenty of amazing companies in the fraternal industry that can help you accomplish and let you focus on truly the mission of your organization.
Yeah, I'm with you. There are great guys like you and many others that are out there. It just depend on their expertise and just get back to advising the students. I mean, at the end of the day, that's why we're all here, is to work with the students and to act as mentors. I mean, fixing the toilets. I mean, there's better things that you could be doing with your time, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So usually when you start your work with what's called the feasibility study, can you explain to our audience the various steps of a feasibility study and why is that important?
Sure. Well, the feasibility study is a roadmap, and I'll equate it to going on vacation. You don't just start driving, because you're going to end up somewhere and it's probably not going to be where you want to end up. You don't just go to the airport and hop on a plane. You're going to end up in some place that you don't want to be at. So the feasibility study really is the roadmap for the organization. It's identifying the major donors, and if they have the interest of giving back to the organization. Just because they have money doesn't mean that they want to give it back to you. And then understanding if there's general support amongst the entire membership for your project. So, we understand what the organization, we look to understand what the organization wants to accomplish. Is it a renovation? Is it a tear down and build new? Is it acquire property for a brand new facility? Is it acquiring a facility for the first time? Understand that. And then we go out and we test that with those major donors, with the organizational insiders, and with the membership as a whole, to see if there's interest in supporting that project. That's a really critical piece, to understand if there's objections out there, what those objections are, and help the organization build a plan to overcome those objections and get them over the hump to get those donors on board. We take all that information, the individual meetings, the phone consultations, the surveys of the entire membership, distill it down into our magic formula. It's not really magic, but there's a process to crunch all those numbers. And we come back to the organization and advise them based upon all of the information that we can gather. We think you can raise X, and that X either helps them, gets them there, or they have to do some reevaluation of the project and the need and move forward. And here's the reason why you do the feasibility study. I said it's your roadmap, but there's another psychological piece for doing this. If you arbitrarily set a goal, and I use round numbers because math is hard and round numbers are easy. If you set an arbitrary goal for $1 million and you work hard and you go out and you raise $750,000, was that campaign successful? Maybe, but you left $250,000 on the table. You fell short by $250,000. Mm-hmm. If you did your feasibility study and the feasibility study comes back and says you can raise $250,000 or $750,000, 750, and you raise 800,000, was that campaign a success? Yeah, absolutely. You not only hit your goal, but you exceeded it. So you have the psychological win factor in there on missing a goal. The converse is also true. If you set an arbitrary goal of $1 million, as soon as you hit that $1 million, your fundraising is done. You can't move the bar. You can't come back and say, oh, well, now we need $1.5 million. Those guys have said, hey, I gave. You hit your goal. You wanted $1 million. You raised $1 million. We're there. You might get a little bit more, but you're not going to get a lot more. Whereas if the goal turned out to be through the feasibility study $1.5 million, now you're going to hit your $1.5 million or come really close to that number. So the feasibility study identifies where you've got challenges, identifies where you've got opportunities, but it helps you set a very realistic goal for everybody to strive for.
Yeah. I mean, just as a follow-up, I'm sure there are some organizations that really have this culture of giving embedded in the organization, that the alumni are accustomed to getting 3 or 4 phone calls a year from the foundation looking for money, right? Yep. And then there's other organizations that, I mean, you never hear from them ever. Yep. Like nobody calls. I got money. Nobody's calling me. Yep. So maybe I shouldn't say that loud, but I guess it goes into the culture of the organization, right?
Yeah, it does. So you'll have the bigger picture organization, the national entity, and then you have the individual house corporations. Right. We encourage all of our clients to establish an annual program where you start to build that culture of giving on an annual basis, so that when you do need to do a capital campaign, you've already established that baseline of giving. The number one complaint that we get when we start doing a feasibility study is, I haven't heard from you in X number of years.
Bingo.
That's the number one complaint by far.
Yeah.
So you establish that pattern of having people give, $50, $100, $250, 500,000, on an annual basis. So set up a automatic recurring credit card where you're tapping their card for $15 a month or whatever that number happens to be, and get them in the habit of doing that. And then when you do need to raise a substantial amount of money, either whether it's a scholarship endowment program or a critical life safety need or a new house, deferred maintenance programs, now you've already got that history, and it's a much easier ask than when it's cold.
Yeah. So let's talk about that communication, because you're basically saying, hey, you got to communicate with your alumni often in order to get to that giving point, right? And not just be asking for money all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen a ton of newsletters, whether that be printed, whether that be digital. What are some of the things in newsletters that you've seen that really stand out from the crowd and are effective?
Yeah. So one of the we'll talk about this alumni communication program ad nauseum, because that's what we do. So newsletter specific, have human interest stories. Our rule of thumb, rule of thumb is 60 to 70% of the content of the newsletter should be alumni focused, and then the balance should be collegiate member focused. Because the audience, who is the newsletter going to? The newsletter is going to alumni. It's not an undergraduate newsletter, it's the alumni newsletter. So you have the undergraduate news, the chapter president story, successes of recruitment, philanthropy, awards, recognition, spotlight a collegiate member, and then have human interest stories on the front end. Spotlight one of your alums, do a story. I guarantee you in every single one of our chapters, there's an alum who's written a book, who's invented something, who's gone on a major life excursion, climbed Mount Everest, went to the Galapagos Islands, been to all 7 continents, has been elected, is in entertainment. There are alumni in every single one of our chapters that have done something interesting. Yeah, capitalize on that. Find them, ask them if they'd be willing to be interviewed for a feature in your newsletter, and do that. Photographs. The picture's worth 1,000 words. Nobody wants to read. You get your 4-page newsletter, 6-page newsletter, and it's all text. Nobody's reading it. Have hero images, on your front and in your middle. So it's a balancing act of identifying, telling the story. And that's ultimately what the newsletter should be doing, is telling the story of what's happening with the alumni as a whole. And that's the human interest piece. That's, unfortunately, who's passed away, who's gotten married, who's got kids, the alumni news piece, and the chapter updates. But, don't sugarcoat the mistakes. Be open and upfront about them. If the chapter has gotten into trouble, talk about it, but talk about how you're working with them to correct those deficiencies and what the plan is. Everybody wants to be associated with successful things.
Sure.
That's human nature. That's, my very good friend and fraternity brother, Mark, who's the voice of the New Orleans Saints. 25 years ago, they weren't called the New Orleans Saints because they didn't win. People were going to the games with bags over their faces so that they could hide their identity. And they were called the Aints. Well, they built a culture of winning, and now it's one of the hardest tickets to get in the NFL because they've built that culture. The same is with our fraternal groups, with our chapters. Build that culture of winning, talk about your successes, address the deficiencies, and put a plan of action to let people know you're dealing with them. And let's celebrate our successes.
Mm-hmm. It seems that some fraternities really just struggle with alumni relations. Going back to your point, I never hear from them, right? And they still haven't figured this out, while other fraternities have done an excellent job. So in your mind, what is a comprehensive alumni relations program? What does that look like?
Sure. So let's break this up into 2 parts. It's either a 2-legged stool or a 3-legged stool. I don't know if there's a such thing as a 2-legged stool, but we'll call it a 2-legged stool or a 3-legged stool. And the difference between if you have a property or assets or not. So all groups should have an alumni advisory board. and that's designed to mentor the collegiate officers in the chapter, as we call it, keep them between the ditches and keep those kids moving down the road, weaving a little bit, but let's keep them between the ditches. All groups should have an alumni association that's designed to bring the alumni members together, have fun, social events, networking, brotherhood types things from the alumni side. And then those groups that have an asset, a property, there should be a house corporation board that's focused purely on managing that asset. Those three entities should be different members, different skill sets, different objectives on all three of those. The Alumni Association, House Corporation work together on the alumni engagement piece, communicating with your members. We advise 5 to 7 touches a year, and a mix of fundraising and fundraising, and the difference being a fundraising piece, you're not asking for money. It's a postcard inviting them to a homecoming game. It's a holiday card. It's a Founders Day email. It's something that just says, hey, we're thinking about you. Here's something that's happening with the chapter that all of our alumni are invited to, or it's an alumni specific event. We'd love to see you. Here's how you get involved. Come on back. And then that fundraising piece of, hey, we're doing some amazing things. The chapter's doing well, or we're struggling. We need some help. Here's how you can be involved with a specific solicitation and appeal.
That's a great program.
And a balance between electronic and print. We're not yet at that electronic adoption rate. So I just ran numbers for the last 6 months. And on the high side, we've got about some groups with about 60% of their members with a good valid email address. Again, math is hard. So we'll just use, if you got 1,000 living members, that means you've got about 600 alumni with a good email address. We're seeing about a 50% open rate, 40 to 50% open rate. So we'll just go 50% because math is easy. That means that 300 of your members actually opened and read that email. So you're at a 30% touch rate when you could be at an 80% if you mail them something. So yes, print is more expensive, and yes, print is slower, but absolutely without a shadow of a doubt, your ROI on print is so much better than electronic.
I totally agree with you. It seems that some organizations are really just going away from the print to save costs. And I totally get that, because I had to manage that budget once upon a time as well. But I agree with you. I think, those touch points and those alumni who are ready to give right now, for the most part, they want something that they can actually open and touch the pages. Well, and you can get that from a PDF file.
And your average gift size on electronic versus print is much smaller than snail mail. So you'll see checks for $500, $1,000, $1,500, $5,000 come in on an annual program with a check, whereas on an electronic piece, you're going to see that average gift size be $25, $50, $100. So you lose money by going to a purely electronic piece, but it's a critically important secondary support tool that has to be as part of your toolbox. And all aspects, not just email, but your social media. So, tap your young alums. We want to find ways for young alums to get involved. Tap into them to manage your social media account, your Instagram, your TikTok, your Snapchat. Don't rely solely on email. We get so much email in our inboxes that if it doesn't get read in that first 4 hours, it's not getting read.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right about it. Now, fraternity today is still struggling with PR. We're seeing hazing cases that are just dominating the news. We're seeing protests happening on the front lawns of fraternity houses, demanding accountability as it relates to sexual assault, alcohol and drug abuse. I mean, we were talking about it in the 20s, in the 1920s, 100 years ago, and we're still talking about it today. So how do we change this narrative to ensure that fraternity actually stays relevant for the next 100 years?
Yeah, it's an interesting time. One of the things that I think we all need to do in our chapters is to really take time to get to know each other as individuals, as humans, and understand them. You don't hurt the ones you love, and you don't let the ones you love make mistakes. And so to me, that's part of the culture of revamping our intake program, our new member program, our education program, and our continuing brotherhood program, and our alumni engagement program to understand who we're associating with. We talked about earlier my time of recruiting and taking time to kind of reevaluate where I wanted to join. Yeah, I took time to learn, and it wasn't intentional at the time. It was purely unintentional by happenstance, but it was the best choice for me. It was to take time and get to know people and understand what culture I was going into. If people took that time, those bad seeds, and we've all got them in every industry across the board. It's not limited to fraternities, it's sports teams and lawyers and doctors and police and politicians and you name it, CEOs. There's good and bad in every, but those bad seeds will reduce in nature if we take time to understand the culture before we join those organizations. And we have to hold groups accountable. The challenge is, we're dealing still with 18, 19, 20-year-old undeveloped brains. And that is a reality. That logical, critical thinking, that frontal lobe doesn't kick in, now we're even hearing until, 23 or 24. But with social media, that instantaneousness of mistakes are there front and center. It's a very interesting balancing act that we have to go through, but we have to hold people accountable, but we have to give them tools to start to understand how to address those challenges as well. So I don't have a good answer. It's a difficult, complicated question, but we'll get there.
Yeah, well, as long as we have guys like you in the industry, I'm confident that we will get there. There's no question about it, because you've got some great advice there. I would encourage, all the alumni who are listening now, the undergraduates, to go back and to listen to those words and really figure out how we can make a difference, and how we can remain relevant over the next 100 years. So that way our children, our grandchildren get the same opportunities that you and I had.
Mike, that just popped into my head. One of the things that we don't do very well, or if we do, we don't talk about it very well, is having regular annual strategic planning, goal setting sessions that are not just with the collegiate members, but engage those 2 or 3 legs of the alumni side as well. So we've got a cohesive, comprehensive plan moving forward. There's a lot of lack of communication between the collegiate members and the alumni. And it builds this animosity, this friction between the two of, the alumni never are there to support us. And why would we support, a bunch of misfits? Well, those are 2 very Catholic statements, which are neither one of them are probably mostly not true. So having those periods of time where you get the chapter or the chapter leadership and the alumni and alumni leadership together and talk about, where are we going to go this year? What's our 5-year plan, and what steps do we need to take to get there? Understanding, senior chapter president, you're not going to be a collegiate member in 5 years, but you're going to be an alum, and you also can reap the benefits of what we do. Now, we just don't do that on a regular basis and remind people of the values of our organizations. I get on my soapbox, and we get on my soapbox now. We've bastardized the term social. It's called social fraternities, and the belief is that that's our excuse to party. None of our organizations were founded upon a party. All of our organizations were founded upon values of how to engage in society as a social person. Holding the door open for other people, pulling the chair out, which fork and knife to use, what are appropriate songs, how do you dress, those types of things. So we, at some point in time, social fraternity got bastardized to mean let's party, and the animal house, and that's, throw these keggers and get wild and crazy. That is not, there are no organizations in the NIC, the NPC, the NPHC that have party as one of their core values. And I think it's important for us to continue to do our rituals and understand the values, and those annual meetings with House Corporation and chapter leaders to talk about the values of the organization and how are we going to apply those values to moving the organization forward can help in addressing a number of those issues. I think we lose sight of what our organizations believe in.
There's no question about it. And, I see it on TikTok every day, focusing on social parties as opposed to, holding the door open or having conversations or networking. And so I think we have, in a sense, lost our way a little bit and gotten away from those core values. But maybe, as you suggested, making sure all three legs of this stool are operating together. And I think it's officer transition is really what you're hinting at, is to have a dedicated time every single year to start talking about goals and objectives, what went right over the last year, what went wrong, learning from that, and making sure that we have a training program for our exec board, that we don't just throw the president into his job with no training, which somehow in fraternity, we think that that's okay. I mean, no company in America does that, but fraternity does it every year. We've never learned from our mistakes. And I think that is the biggest issue we have in fraternities.
Sometimes twice a year.
Right. Sometimes. Yeah, we got to fix that.
The last piece, I love talking about marketing. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, but when we're recruiting new members, we don't market ourselves correctly. And I use, when I have done in the past recruitment workshops, give three products up on the board and 3 television shows, a Tide detergent, Monster energy drink, and beer, and then Days of Our Lives, wrestling, and NASCAR. And you ask people which product is most likely going to be advertised on which program, and everyone's like, oh, that's easy, the laundry detergent and the Days of Our Lives, the soap opera, and Monster, and wrestling, and beer, and NASCAR. Like, you're exactly right. Now let's apply that to our recruitment. Who do we want to recruit? Well, everybody's going to say we want to recruit leaders and smart and well-rounded and balanced and all those great words. But what do we market ourselves? Come join our fraternity, we'll have a great time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those two things don't mesh.
Yeah.
So if you want to recruit those leaders, those well-rounded individuals, then market your philanthropy. Market your awards, market your academic achievements, market, how many brothers or sisters are involved in other campus organizations. You market that, and you're going to attract those well-rounded, balanced leaders. If you market yourselves as, hey, we have a great time, guess what you're going to get?
Yep.
You're going to get those men that want to have a great time.
Right. And you're not going to find the leaders that you really needed to position yourself in the future for success.
Yep. So I'm stepping down off my soapbox.
You're absolutely right. I mean, all too often I see these recruitment t-shirts and they're ripping off a brand label of a liquor or a beer in the Rush t-shirt. And I'm like, what kind of people do you think you're going to recruit with that? You're going to recruit the guys that only come to your social events, but you'll never see them doing community service. You won't see them graduating with a 4.0 academically, and you're certainly not going to see them on exec board because that's too much work. They're just here for the social. That's it.
You're probably not going to see them graduate first.
Well, yeah, that too, that too. So anyway, but yeah, you're absolutely right. You and I can get on our soapbox and talk about this all day long. But I think, here we have some really good information for our undergraduates to think about in listening to this interview. Now, we love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. And I live in Nashville, where you're at in Atlanta. That's a very short drive away from me for the weekend, about 4 hours. So what local restaurant do I need to try the next time I'm in Atlanta?
So I'm going to be very broad. And if you like international food, then you need to check out Buford Highway. So Buford Highway runs about 6 or 7 miles, maybe even longer than that, from Brookhaven all the way up to Norcross, and it is full of the most amazing international cuisine that you can think of: Central American, South American, Mexican, Chinese, Thai, Korean, Colombian, you name it, and you can find it. And it is a foodie's connoisseur dream. So I can't give you one, but I can tell you an area. And there's actually a website, I think it's called We Love Buford Highway. And you can find any flavor you want, and it's amazing.
I'm going to go to the website. I'm going to go check it out, but that's going to leave me in Atlanta for at least a week or two because there's going to be no way I can get it all done in a day.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I love it. All right. So if our listeners, if they want to connect with you and your team at Elevate for a feasibility study, a campaign, capital campaign, alumni communications, where should they go to connect with you?
Sure. Real simple. Elevate IMS, IndigoMarySam.com, elevateims.com. That's the best way to get a hold of us, but we're also on Instagram and Facebook, same letters, Elevate IMS. Feel free to reach out. We'd love to chat and see how we can help you.
I love it. ElevateIMS.com. Brian, you are the real deal, man. I'm so glad that our paths have crossed because now I have a new friend in Atlanta, and we'll probably be spending 24 hours, 48 hours talking about fraternity, and it's going to go by in about 5 minutes. So for us anyway, in real time, it'll be days. So I appreciate what you do. I really appreciate the time you spent with us because I think that there are just some hidden gold in this conversation. And I think it's going to be one of the more popular episodes of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. So for that, I appreciate you. Thank you for what you do.
Oh, Michael, thank you. It's 100% my honor. And thank you for what you do and giving back to our amazing community of Greek leaders. We are blessed to be surrounded by some of the most talented people out there, but we can always do better. Never rest on your laurels.
That's it. I'm always looking to improve. No matter how good we are, I always think we can be better. It's just never ending.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with Brian, make sure you like it. Make sure you share it with some of your alumni, maybe that are thinking about doing a feasibility study. Maybe they're thinking about doing a capital campaign. Brian would love to talk to you a little bit more about all of that and just give you some helpful hints. He certainly is, a great wealth of resources and knowledge to help you and your alumni to be successful. So thank you so much for listening. And we hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks again, and we will see you next time.